Boardroom Bound, episode 177, exploring meaningful impacts through ESG in the boardroom with Joyce Cacho.
It is an all-board effort that needs to be informed by financial materiality assessments being done for the companies through an ESG lens, so that the board can then have a new starting line.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give aspiring and existing directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's show, we're speaking with Joyce Cacho, and she has twice been named Savoy Network's most influential Black corporate director. She brings a tremendous background experience in ESG, and she's going to talk about her journey in landing not only a public company board seat, but then realizing wanting to do more of that and the journey and how that continued from there. Before we jump into today's show, I'd like to share a message from our sponsor about board director education and certification. Want to join your first board or looking for additional board seat opportunities? In either scenario, be sure to be disciplined in your approach through the Becoming an Exceptional Board Director Candidate Education and Certification course. Get both the Modern Board Director Candidate Packaging and Modern Board Operations Knowledge integrated with one program. Remember, the key to landing additional or your first board seat is in your packaging. Make the effort to do it right. Program graduates also receive their globally recognized International Board Director Competency designation upon course completion, available in one-on-one, group, or on-demand registration options. You can learn more at bit.ly, that's bit.ly/IBDC-D. So bit.ly/IBDC-D. And now, let's jump into the show. Joyce Cacho, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
It's my honor and pleasure to be a guest on your show.
Well, this is fun for me because I know you've listened for a while, so you have a sense for how the episodes go, and I'm very excited for our audience to hear about your story and the specific expertise and brand that you bring and how you've gone about in your board career, because I think that will be insightful for all of us. Before we start diving into that fun stuff, though, your background, your career is very important because it'll set up the conversation we're going to have today. So maybe you can start by walking through some of that history for us.
Oh, let me start from today and go back a little bit. I sit on Sunrise Bank's NA board and serve on the Finance and Audit Committee, as well as the Compliance and Bank Secrecy Act Committee. I also serve on a growing nonprofit board, which is relevant to corporations, called the World Benchmarking Alliance. It's headquartered in the Netherlands, and it is a native remote working company and with a globally distributed team who is charged with creating indexes that benchmark 2,000 companies around the world that can have the greatest impact on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. I came to board work somewhat by intention and design. I had served as a global chief sustainability officer for a chemical company with the St. Louis headquarters. And right around that time, I was also invited to join the board of a nationally named international development company. And I say that because the two sort of opportunities came to draw on my corporate finance and investment banking experience, where I led and transformed the business of Rabobank International. And some may know they are a leading global bank with an extensive U.S. presence now in the space of food and agribusiness. So I tend to walk into spaces as an entrepreneur on the corporate side, and as an entrepreneur on the corporate side. And as a board director, I bring to the fore finance, governance skills, and linking the social and environmental dimensions to how companies put together their strategies and are held accountable. That's me in a nutshell.
All right, well, Joyce, let's take the career arc from being a global chief sustainability officer, and we're going to talk about ESG in a few minutes. And you landed your first major board seat a little bit after that, Land O'Lakes, a product I actually used this morning when I helped my daughters get their Thomas's English muffins ready. How did that board seat come about?
It always makes me pause and then chuckle, because it came about by an outgoing board director being asked, as is the norm, are there any names that come to mind, given that he was rolling off the board. And so he and I actually had collaborated on bringing together International Development Committee and Industry Committee back when I was doing my doctoral work, and I was co-chair of the Industry Committee. He was the chair of the International Development Committee, and we saw the opportunity together to combine efforts, invite one speaker that could speak to the continuum of agribusiness. So not only talking separately about international development, but also weaving in the issues and the challenges and the opportunities faced by U.S. agribusiness. And so it was an innovative way of bringing people together. And I don't think that Dr. Bob, as he's commonly known, Dr. Bob Thompson, has ever forgotten about that. And we interacted when he served on the North American Agribusiness Advisory Committee or board of when I was developing and running research at Rabobank International North America. And so when he was rolling off of the Land O'Lakes board, my name came to mind. He popped me an email, and we got together in those days for a coffee, and we talked about the opportunity. And I had the enterprise risk management skills, both domestic and international, as well as this finance background, which includes a certificate in anti-money laundering. And so brought those skills into the boardroom, and it was really exciting because they were going through approaching their 100-year anniversary, and I was the first woman on the board. I was the first African American on the board. I was the first what should I say? Multilingual person. I certainly shared the room with a few other board colleagues who sported a hair cut, as I do, which is rather short, bordering on bald. So it was a fun way to enter the world of corporate board directorship, and very pleased with that experience, including being in the room when Beth Ford, the current president and CEO of Land O'Lakes Incorporated, was brought on board.
So Joyce, what I'm going to do is make sure I draw some lines here for our audience, because people are generally thinking, well, how do I land a board seat? What do I need to do? There were a couple key parts here. One, someone who knew you and respected you and liked you was thinking of you, right? Really important part of that story. And the opportunity found you, which is what we ideally want. But we also have to remember what you told us a bit about your background experience, about some of the stuff you'd done at Rabobank, at some of the stuff that you'd been doing at Novus. These were in some related industries to Land O'Lakes. So it wasn't like you got plucked out of something wildly different, which some people happen sometimes, but you're still working in the agri, the food, the ag tech. There's a lot of similarities and relationships there. And I think that's really important for people to think about. And so now you've advanced, you've got that stamp on your resume that says I was on a public company board, right? Which is what a lot of people want to get. They want to be able to put that ribbon on their chest as part of one of their medals. And so now tell us a bit about Sunrise Banks, right? So here's a different type of experience. You got a CDFI. How did something like that come about? Was that you proactively finding it, or did it find you as well?
I was proactive about it because I really began to appreciate the role of governance and being an independent director as I served on the Land O'Lakes board. And of course, I had the banking experience. What I also knew was that what we today are finding increasingly more commonplace, the whole use of fintech. And that is an umbrella over things that many of your listeners will know about: PayPal, Zelle, Cash App. The names go on and on. But at the time I joined the board, it was really unique to hear Sunrise Bank's president and our board chair today talk about the role of fintech in the United States and bringing in financial health, and that being part of engaging and including a broader swath of people into the financial system. Now, I say it's interesting because I have woven in on the ground authentic experiences in international markets. And believe it or not, in international markets, especially across Africa, fintech was par for the course. It happened. It grew up on the continent quite rapidly, much as the cell phone and mobile technology was rapidly adopted in those markets. And so I was very familiar with fintech as a norm. And so David Reiling caught my attention because he understood that. And he understood that the U.S. was going in that direction with our younger consumers, with consumers no longer thinking of cash, paper money, as needed to pay for any of anything, as digitization and the digital financial economy took on its hockey stick growth. And having been an entrepreneur, so an executive who starts new business units within a broader framework, I was very excited to meet and talk more with David at Sunrise Banks. And as we spoke, I said, "Is there need for any more board members in your boardroom?" And true story, he said, "Well, that depends on how business goes." And I believe that was in August or September. And so I'm intentional, if nothing else. And so I followed up with him in the fourth quarter to see how business was going. And at that point, he said, yes, he needed another board director. And my having my CAM certification, my certificate in anti-money laundering, given the fast pace of business and the growth of the fintech industry and bringing new and different faces into the banking world, I think that was a plus for him to invite me to join the board.
Now, Joyce, one of the things I want to make sure we talk about in the boardroom, in addition to the journey of how you got in there, and I know that is in many ways exactly what our audience wants to hear, but you're bringing a certain amount of expertise, right? And no one's a jack of all trades. I'm going to learn it on the fly. People want to know that you're bringing something that they need. And we need to talk about ESG here, right? Because this is these three words are so powerful when we think about the boardroom today. And people think they mean different things. They put them on different committees. They're not sure how to do them. They're big and complex. It's an area that you spend a lot of time in. You've got a big platform around it. Maybe we can just start by breaking down. Many of us might know what it actually stands for, and some other might argue maybe it should be guessed because governance is more important. We get into all these great debates. Tell us about ESG, what it looks and feels like, and maybe how you've interacted with the boardroom, and we'll go from there.
So ESG, sadly, has been thought of as three separate issues: environment, social, and corporate governance. And I say sadly because ESG, while not a word unto itself, is to point to opportunities of value that are derived from financial value, that are derived from acknowledging that what you produce, how you produce it, who produces it, is not separate and different from the environment. Similarly, around social, the S, the social, it's getting to how you create the value, who creates the value locally in your supply chain, whether or not those persons are bringing their whole selves have the opportunity to bring their whole selves to their work environment. And lastly, corporate governance. That, I will say, is the rail. Let's think in physical terms. If you're riding the railroad tracks, that's the non-negotiable on which that the train must be in contact with to be rolling forward. What absolutely has me concerned, but optimistic, is that we're shifting from the discussion and several and continuing discussion about the order of the letters, what do they mean, and moving to how do boards position themselves to be accountable for the duty of oversight in a way that reflects an understanding of the intersection between E and S, and making sure it is codified in good corporate culture and governance.
Now, I imagine you would suggest that organizations are probably going to have to shift their perspectives and their strategies to fully integrate ESG criteria. And, maybe what's confusing is there's no standard set today. There's no clear framework that everybody should follow this. And I think we're moving towards that space. Like, companies are working together with regulators to try and get there. So it's a bit of a moving target. And everyone's clearly going to miss things because this is hard and we're growing, developing. As long as we're moving in the right direction, that's positive steps. But how are you helping the organizations you're working with to think about this and figure out what the right steps are to take forward?
I would say that I ask questions that are helpful. I share what I think is thought leadership on this area. For example, I have published in NACD Board Talk an article that takes a playbook approach to committees and the questions that they should be asking executives so that ESG becomes part of the everyday discussion, operations, and financial reporting. And I will ask questions even about how can I put this? How our companies are interacting with financial capital markets, right? We see the rise in green bonds, for example. And when you have a report that says, for various reasons, the company is engaging in financial capital markets, I ask, are we putting an E lens or an S lens or both on what we decide to purchase? I am very aware that it is a moving target. It was 2009 where I began my role as a global chief sustainability officer. At that time, it was the alphabet soup galore about which framework one should follow. I think we should all know that while we're reading the 500-page document from the SEC about climate change, right, November of last year was landmark in accountability and transparency, that would be disclosure, of companies and where they are on their ESG journey. And so, to me, it is an all-board effort that needs to be informed by financial materiality assessment being done for the company through an ESG lens, so that the board can then have a benchmark, a new starting line to then start putting in place, asking questions, so that the time between when the company starts considering ESG and when it actually is systematically embedding ESG in its financial performance is a shorter period than the 10, 15 years it took to go from several different frameworks to today, where the International Accounting Standards Board has put together a committee that will come out with clear sustainability standards for that financial accountants should be following. And so waiting for government policy is definitely putting you at a disadvantage. And for board directors specifically, we're living in a world where transparency is not something only up to the company. The World Wide Web is really the World Wide Web. The internet is there for everybody. And so I would say that your duty of oversight is something that you need to be very active about managing.
Joyce, let me ask about how maybe you've tackled it at some different organizations. And organization structure can vary wildly by industry, right? For example, there's some committees in financial services that don't exist in others. If you're in banks versus, say, CPG, right? All sorts of different things can change. But generally, when people think about committees, you probably always have audit. Maybe you've got compensation, probably nom-gov, right? And some orgs might have others. ESG, depending on how either an industry and or an organization thinks about it, it might be carved up in different ways. You made the point a minute ago, we shouldn't separate the letters. We should keep them together. Different companies have different thoughts about where they should put them on the different committees. If someone were saying, Joyce, tell us what the best practice is, what would you advise?
Best practice, let's agree on what the goal is. And as a board director, my goal is to live up to my duty of care, duty of loyalty, and most definitely my duty of oversight. So there are 3 committees that the SEC say you must have: nom-gov, compensation, and audit. And so putting ESG in a separate ad hoc committee I question whether or not that's living up to doing the right thing for the company at all times. Not only what the company will think, but what the courts may think. And so that's why I advocate that ESG needs to, for accountability reasons, needs to be embedded in the 3 main committees, and not doing so is really a risk to you as an individual, as a board director, and more broadly to the company, continuing to either treat ESG as the flavor of the month or the cycle, or treat ESG as something that it is okay to wait for public policy to come down and make it a compliance issue.
So, Joyce, if I flash forward to, from when ESG first started a while ago to where we are today, we could argue that in the last couple of years during COVID, and we never want to waste a crisis, the world has changed dramatically in how it thinks about ESG. It's gotten to the point where it's really no longer optional. It's required. It's a need to have. You must do. And every organization is probably trying to figure out how do I do it better? How do I do it smarter? Maybe I don't know how to get this hard data, and how can I benchmark myself if I don't have that? And how do I know I grew and developed? So the world has quickly changed and from the demand side. And it's really fascinating about there's, desire for increased transparency and accountability, embedding of financial material factors of ESG. These are good things. And it's very clear that investors are only going to be demanding more information and accountability around it. And if you sort of look forward going, okay, I've seen this journey, I've been on this journey, I've been enjoying this journey, where do you think it's headed over the next couple of years? How do we think this is going to continue to evolve?
I think it's going to evolve into really a bifurcation of companies who say what they know and say what they don't know today, and say what they're planning to do about what they don't know, either on the smaller company end of the scale. So they've got agility. They know that they have got value that needs to be recognized by future investors. It's part of their brand. The other end are large companies who are having tougher conversations with their auditors to say, this is a non-negotiable today. ESG is a non-negotiable. We need help, and we need help now. So, less genteel kind of conversations and more about get us on the right track, and we're willing to make investments so that we are on the right track sooner than the regulators are going to be coming down the pipe, because we get that employees are here demanding it, that investors are demanding it, that customers are demanding it, and that communities will find data if we don't create our own data, right? So those are the two camps that I'm absolutely on board with, the thinking that they will get there without waiting for regulators. There is a swath of companies in the middle who, for various reasons, are slow on the uptick, think that greenwashing or social washing, or thinking that the poor corporate governance will never see the light of day, and so they will continue to do what they do in terms of how they treat women, how they treat people who don't look like the broad majority of folks sitting in boardrooms today. And these companies are really what will fuel, or what today, in today's terms, are fueling a robust, vibrant M&A market. And so I think that where we're headed has been known to business for a very long time. Leaders and laggards. And I would say that if you're on the board of a company who has a singular, in your board skills matrix, that ESG skill is filled by one person, I would say your boardroom is a risky place to be. And if the lift to go from where you are today, flat-footed, to running forward, not as a greenwasher, not as a culture washer, not as a corporate governance washer, but in earnest, in hardwiring ESG to your strategy and your financial data, if the lift is too large, I would be talking to investment bankers about what M&A is going to look like for us.
Well, Joyce, we were delighted to have you on the show today. Thank you for sharing your insights and helping all of us to be boardroom bound.
Thank you so much, Alexander.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Joyce Cacho, and it was wonderful to hear how her prior experience, including as a global chief sustainability officer, translated over into her board space. Clearly an expert in ESG, loves talking about it. That came through today, and a lot of knowledge to share with all of us because it's a topic that we need to be prepared to bring our best selves in over to the boardroom. And remember, if you head over to podcast.gordon.edu, you'll find links to all of today's resources. And please know that the Boardroom Bound team and I are so proud to be your go-to podcast for all things that connect, prepare, and empower you to land a board seat. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and miss any of the high-quality content that we're bringing to you every Wednesday. And thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.